Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to Mimesis Documentary Festival. My name is Ray Sugis. I'm a professor in the Department of Critical Media Practices at the University of Colorado at Boulder. The topic of this particular discussion is called Performing Representation. And this is a conversation, or rather a forum for the free flow of ideas pertaining to the questions of the diaspora, sort of broadly defined, the body, religion, syncretism, symbolism, and the role of the archive in documentary film practice. I have here a very distinguished group of filmmakers, of film artists, who have all generously allowed us to watch their work, and have also agreed to engage us in their work. I want to begin by introducing to you the sort of panelists. First is Rox Campbell. His film is called "There's Just Something About Death That Makes Us Dance," the revival. And this film is based in Jamaica, which is also his homeland. Rox Campbell is a documentary film practitioner. He works in the field of expanded media, deploying both analog and digital cinematographic techniques to explore the historical and cultural processes of creolization and religious syncretism. His work has been exhibited at the South African National Gallery, the Penn Museum, the Power Plant Gallery. We also have with us Alex Morelli. His film is called Becoming. He's an artist, filmmaker based in Durham, North Carolina. His work intersects observational narratives and experimental modalities of documentary practice through which he examines intergenerational memory, place, and identity formation. We also have on the panel Sunil Sanjiri. His film is called At Home, But Not at Home, which is a very kind of diasporic experience. Sunil works on a multiplicity of platforms, experimental video, animation, essayistic narratives, and installation. His work has been exhibited in the Czech Republic, Gaza, Mexico City, and his work focuses on identity, cinema, and liberation. And in the process, he also deploys extensive use of both photographs and archival moving images to construct his narratives. We also have with us from Brazil, Rafael Barbosa and Werner Salles. They're both journalists, sort of curators and cultural producers. They work extensively in both narrative films and documentary films. And the film that we watched is called The Horse, which is a film about religious syncretism in Brazil through dance. We also have with us Alexander Ling and Jacob Jacobson. The film is called The Remanding, and they both hail from Denmark. I would also like to say that we have with us a graduate student from my department. Her name is Renato Barreto, who's also from Brazil, and she is the one that's going to translate for us today from our brothers and sisters in Brazil. So I want to start by asking the very first question, which is basically just to ask our panelists to each give us a very brief overview of their particular work and their approach to documentary filmmaking. And I would start here with Sunil.
Thank you, Reese, and thank you to all my co-panelists. It's a great honor to be here with you all. Yeah, so I primarily work with like the hybrid kind of format. I don't necessarily consider myself either an experimental filmmaker or an essay filmmaker, and I use kind of hybridity of formats and techniques of engaging with the moving image throughout history. I like to sample a lot of other filmmakers' works to kind of work in a continuum. A lot of my work is based on my diasporic experience as an Indian American, especially someone who's been estranged from his homeland. And I'm also engaging in a lot of Indian politics that are going on with the current oppression and apartheid that's going on in Kashmir. And particularly this film engaged with the diasporic experience of Portuguese colonialism that dominated my family's ancestors for 400 plus years, almost 500 years. And I'm very glad to be in this conversation with my Brazilian brothers and sisters as well. So thank you for putting us in conversation here. And I look to hear from the other filmmakers as well about how they engage what I see as a kind of multiple different forms of hybridity within the moving image.
Thank you. Rox Campbell.
Hi, everyone. I would say that my work, so I mainly actually work in photography, but as a filmmaker, I think I take more of an observational approach. I think that this work in particular, there's just something about death that makes us dance, is indicative of that observational approach. It was a piece that was born out of like curiosity and also just childhood stories about a specific group of people, the revival Zionist group of people in Kingston, Jamaica, and just their practices and my interest in kind of understanding how stereotypical notions of their practices, hearing those things growing up, actually relate to what is actually truly being represented when you enter those spaces. So I kind of like to enter the spaces and observe in the same way that I think about photography. I try to apply that to like my filmmaking methods. So.
Thank you. Now, Alex Morelli, could you tell us a bit more about your work, Becoming, and your approach to this very complicated contemporary period that your film addresses?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. Had a chance to see many of the films so far, and I'm looking forward to continuing to watch. I think like a few people on this panel, I came to nonfiction film through both the personal documentary and observational cinema, and the kind of hybrid of those two worlds. And then also in recent years, I've begun to incorporate more analog practice into my filmmaking, and some of that is a response to the analog formats that many of the family archives contain that I've worked with, like my own family's home movies. And part of that is just a joy of making images on film, and the process and the slowness that entails. And then I think many of my films also have somewhat of a collaborative element between myself and one or more people that I'm filming, and also an element that deals with migration and the effects of migration on diasporic communities. My first film explored my grandfather's own kind of mysterious identity in my family as an immigrant, and then Becoming documents several months surrounding my partner's naturalization experience last summer here in North Carolina. So it sort of unfolds as a surreal home movie in some ways, slipping in and out of sync, and all shot on a hand-wound Bolex that kind of adds some formal boundaries to the process. So thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'd like to now turn to Rafael Barbosa and Vernon Salles and our guests from Brazil. About your approach to The Horse, which is your film in the festival, your methodology, just your general kind of take on questions with diaspora, particularly in Brazil.
Olá, boa tarde. Muito obrigado a todos. Eu sou Rafael Barbosa. Vocês me escutam bem?
Are you listening?
Yes.
Ok. Aqui é Werner Salles, co-diretor do filme. Alexandre Constantino e Joelma Ferreira, que fazem parte do elenco, são 2 atores. Nós somos de Alagoas, que é um pequeno estado do Nordeste brasileiro, mas que, apesar do momento de pandemia e também do desmonte que o governo de Jair Bolsonaro tem feito no cinema brasileiro, nós estamos conseguindo ter um momento de desenvolvimento da produção local, com os nossos filmes chegando em diversos lugares, inclusive participar desse festival e participar desse debate. Faz parte desse momento de conquistas, de romper barreiras. Isso é muito importante para a gente. Vestir, inclusive, essa camisa que é da Mostra de Cinema Alagoano, como uma forma de também agradecer aos colegas que contribuíram na construção desse momento, que é muito coletivo, né? E Alagoas é o estado, é o território que sediou o Quilombo dos Palmares, que foi o grande foco, um dos maiores focos de luta pela liberdade, né, do mundo, de resistência negra do mundo. E isso é algo que é muito expressivo, muito forte para a gente, culturalmente. É uma herança, né, uma memória muito forte.
Rafael, só um momento, senão eu não vou conseguir lembrar de tudo. Tá? So you're saying by now that they are from Alagoas, which is a northeastern state from Brazil, and it's a historical place because it's a place that hosted Quilombo dos Palmares, which is a resistant community from the 18th century that is a symbol of the Black struggle in Brazil. And they're saying that despite the dismounting of Brazilian cinema made by the government of Jair Bolsonaro, they're still resilient there and still doing cinema. And he's showing his T-shirt of his logo. Yeah. Pode continuar, Rafael.
Bom, Cavallo, nosso filme, é uma missão híbrido entre ficção e documentário experimental, onde a gente trabalha com 7 personagens que potencializam a sua expressão, a sua arte através do seu corpo, através de performances que foram co-criadas por eles, num processo que beira o documentário. E a gente tentou passar, nesse documentário, vivenciar todas essas questões que ligam o nosso local de origem, Alagoas, o inconsciente e as nossas raízes.
So he's talking about linking the unconscious, the root of the place, with the artist's performance and trajectory. So he's saying that his film is like this coming together of performance and documentary, and that he's trying to bring out this unconscious and the roots of the place.
Okay, thank you so much. And Jacobson has just joined us. Hello, Jacob, welcome. Jacob hails from Denmark. He has conducted extensive research into African homelessness in Copenhagen. He has also lived and worked in Zambia, Tanzania, and Uganda, where his work focused on African labor, workers' rights, mental health, and LGBTQ issues. Jacob, would you just tell us something very briefly about your work or this particular film, the Remandi, and your approach to its execution?
Yes, well, I directed the Remandi together with a colleague from the National Film School of Denmark. The film is set in a prison in Zambia, where we have been actually working for many years trying to find a story that we could link with. We thought it was important to now the relevance to this debate about representation, about representing the place in a fair manner, but also telling a good story. So we have been really visited the place a lot, waited a long time to find a story where we felt it would be a fair portray of some of the major problems going on there, but in where we could see that we could present this in an engaging manner, or at least that was what we were hoping to achieve. So the film here follows. I think our strategy was to go to connect with a particular story, not to attempt on applying a view from nowhere, or I think sometimes in anthropology it's called the God perspective, where we kind of came with the truth about this place. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to try to find a particular story with very particular people. So it became you can say a small story with one particular officer and one particular inmate and the inmate's family, and then all the contradictions and challenges they have in terms of the struggles that obviously come from being imprisoned for years without ever being sentenced for anything. So we follow this inmate who has been in this place for 3 years without any sentence, and the desperation that this brings to his life and his relationships with his wife and his child in particular. And then this officer who tries to help the inmate. So that's kind of the story, we kind of the narrative that we connect with. And yeah, that was a bit about the background of
Okay.
that film. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll circle back to that because there's a question I want to ask pertaining to that particular work. But I want to go back to Sunil's work at home but not at home. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you approached your work at the archives, because your work utilizes archival materials quite extensively?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. I think that I think I question a lot of what this idea of the archive is, and specifically in relationship to how materials are stored. And I mean, it's a really rich place, but it's also the archive is a very, rooted in histories of colonialism and imperialism, right? And I think about how that plays out in film. So a lot of my film excerpts are clips from films that I use, such as the Indian filmmakers from the parallel cinema movement, which primarily came out of Bengal. And I think about how these films have kind of been left to the dust, or left to kind of hardcore cinephiles, right? To kind of and the Indian state doesn't do a job of preserving these films because it doesn't serve them a purpose of kind of national pride anymore, as much as it did when they were created. But a lot of these filmmakers, such as Ritwik Ghatak and Mrinal Sen, in addition to Satyajit Roy, were exposing the poverty of their time and the ongoing complications of post-independence, post-colonialism. And so, yeah, I think a lot of what I do, I leave like the watermarks in the archival footage to kind of signify that this is coming from somewhere else, somewhere that's not, somewhere that has been traded, that the files have been kind of degraded over time, and that they've been like circulated primarily in like underground economy. So I think about how moving images function, specifically that are not, that have not been preserved, because the question of preservation itself is a question of colonial interests. Mm-hmm. So it relates primarily to me in that register, but also on the register of like understanding my own identity through through the moving image and through images in general, right? So we have this image taken by an amazing photojournalist, Ricardo Rangel, who was a Mozambican photojournalist who documented the independence movements in Angola and Mozambique. And there's this amazing photo that he took at the moment at which it was announced that Goa where my family is from, Goa in India, had been liberated from the Portuguese. So it was in 1961, and you see this image in my film of this kind of plaque, this placard on the, in the town square that says Goa is no longer under Portuguese rule, and this is in Mozambique. So you have a crowd of Mozambicans, some of whom are, Portuguese, and some of whom are Black and African, and you see their facial expressions, their disbelief, almost, one could imagine, that a world could exist without Portuguese occupation. So there's a level of imagination that's activated by the archive. Similarly, with the 1955 Bandung conference, where I have this clip that says, here we are, the first ever meeting of colored people, and then they continue, so-called colored people. And it's this amazing moment at the introduction to the 1955 Bandung conference, which united, it's the Afro-Asian Solidarity Conference. So it brought together a representatives that represented half of the world against colonialism and neo-imperialism to ensure that this would never happen again. And of course, we know it's ongoing, that colonialism is ongoing.
Okay. And just very briefly, could you talk about your use of animation in your documentary practice?
Yeah, animation is something that I use to interact with history. It's a way of engaging with history. It's a way of engaging with the materials that I have, specifically with my father's images, images of him as a young boy in India and in Goa and during the British and the Portuguese occupation. And so, there's a method of like creating something that doesn't exist in this world yet. There's a level of like world building that I try and activate with my imagination through animation. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it's limited by the kind of world that already exists. So animation is an interesting way to play with what exists and what doesn't exist. Yeah, I'll just kind of leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. And now I want to turn to Alex Morelli. Could you address what I see as the paradoxes of citizenship that your work addresses through the experiences of your partner being Argentinian and going up for citizenship, but yet feeling this propensity towards protest around questions of immigration in the United States?
Yeah, certainly. I think, so I had my partner sort of served as a scout in some ways, because she was able to first witness her sister's citizenship ceremony, which I didn't attend. And it was after that event that she kind of came back and told me how much the kind of official staff there made space for families who wanted to document the event and to celebrate this event, and to kind of say, like, this is what you should be filming, this is what you should be remembering. At the same time, there's this video on the screen that's telling you that you must reject your past, and you are now an American, and you must kind of attain these American values. So I think the process, even in that ceremony, is full of contradiction, of both like encouraging remembrance, but also like a forgetting. And I think I was responding to the ambivalence that she felt during these few months, and she, a few weeks before this ceremony was scheduled, she was in the borderlands in Arizona and Nogales, Mexico, conducting dissertation research. And we were, talking on the phone, and she was telling me how strange it was to be kind of moving back and forth every day through this border crossing and volunteering with these organizations. Meanwhile, having this kind of light at the end of the tunnel for herself, only a few weeks away. And she was also quite scared that if she took a certain type of risk and was arrested by police or by border patrol, that could impact her own process. So there's certainly a contradiction and a paradox in doing that work as well. And then I kind of experienced maybe a paradox in being both an insider and an outsider in these spaces, both being kind of having a certainly like a front row seat to all that was happening, but having not had to experience this and go through this myself, and trying to figure out what my role was in this space and how I could be in the film without the film being about me and about my experience. And I think that solution to that was leaning into the kind of vocal dialectic that kind of plays throughout the film, which is sort of a slightly performative version of studying for the citizenship test, and kind of me reading passages from this prepared archive of American history, and my partner kind of challenging it at every turn. So yeah, and then the film itself, there's always a tension between the image and the sound, whether things are supposed to be simultaneous or not, or places where the film kind of comes off the rails a little bit. I was trying to loosen up a little bit in my practice in this particular film.
Okay.
Be more spontaneous.
Great, thank you so much. Now there are two films in this, or two groups of filmmakers in this panel, whose work explicitly addresses dance and religious syncretism, and those filmmakers are Rox and Rafael Barbosa and Werner Salles. I want to start with our colleagues in Brazil. One of the consistent themes throughout the horse is the presence of water, but also the connection of the body to ancestral spirits like Oshun and Shango and Orishas. I want you just to address how you conceptualize that particular approach to connecting dance or movement and the body in relation to the gods, to the ancestral gods like Oshun, through the religious system of Candomblé, which is the most popular Afro-religious movement in Brazil.
Ele está perguntando sobre como vocês trabalharam essa relação entre o candomblé, né, o Oxum e Xangô, e a performance da dança, e como é que vocês veem essa relação entre dança e documentário?
Dando continuidade ao ponto que estava falando, sobre a herança ancestral negra que o nosso território tem, a gente queria também falar sobre isso, sobre o território e nós fizemos esse recorte de escolher como personagens dançarinos, porque eles trazem esse repertório na sua prática, né? E a gente queria investigar como essa ancestralidade pode ser observada por meio do corpo, né? E obviamente, como parte dessa representação do simbólico ancestral, né, os orixás são arquétipos importantíssimos que são muito úteis para se abordar. Deixa eu botar uma vez.
Renata?
Oh, yeah. So he's talking about this relation between ancestrality and territory. Okay, and how to find this, how to search this through your body. So he's talking about the orishas, like this the most important archetypes of African Brazilian religion, and that's why they went for a local dancers and local people who are doing not only like they are working with performance and dance, but they are also living the religion, the candomblé, the Brazilian African religion.
Okay, would Rafael want to add anything to that?
Se você quer adicionar alguma coisa?
Sim, e uma questão importante também a respeito da água é que Alagoas, Maceió, onde o filme foi feito, é uma cidade lacustre, uma cidade quase anfíbia, onde ela foi feita por lagoas e por rios. E parte da subsistência do alagoano e de uma classe social muito importante se tira da lama, se tira da lagoa. Então, a lagoa é um arquétipo, além do arquétipo de referência ancestral, um arquétipo de referência econômica e contemporânea da nossa sociedade.
So the name of the state, Alagoas, it means lakes, little lakes. So the whole state is like drowned in water and mud. So the subsistence of the Alagoan people comes from the mud and from the water. So that's why the water is so present.
Mm-hmm. Does that also relate to the Yoruba gods?
Ele está perguntando se isso tem relação com os deuses Yorubá, com a água.
No meu caso, o orixá, né, que eu descobri ser filha durante o filme, que é o Oxum e tem relação com água, foi proposto, né, que eu trabalhasse naquele território de água e, consequentemente, meio aqui também, né, porque sou alagoana. Foi uma riqueza, um desafio e esteticamente belo, assim, né? Então, Oxum tem relação com a água, né, água doce, água do rio, e aí, a partir desses arquétipos, foi construído a minha performance.
Qual é seu nome, querido?
Joelma.
Joelma is saying that throughout the film, she discovered that she's a daughter of Oshun, is a Yoruba Orisha. And Oshun is a goddess of the lakes and rivers, and that was a form her experience of making this film, discovering of being Oshun's daughter.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Wonderful. And Rox, could you tell us a bit more about your work around this revivalist Jamaican religious or ritual around the burial? I know it has its roots back in the 1800s in Jamaica, and why you chose that particular. Can you hear me?
I missed a part of that.
No problem. So the question is, could you talk to us about your approach or your understanding of this particular Jamaican religious practice, the revival around the dead, around the burial? And I know, it has its roots in the 1800s, and it's something for a long time. I don't know, it's very prevalent throughout the island.
Yeah. So I should have mentioned this earlier, but I think it's important to know that how I got there was from my own, hearing stories around the island about these people always mention cults, right? And I think that was my introduction to it. So I grew up in Jamaica, and before I moved to America, this was pretty prevalent. So if someone did something to you, they'd talk about this idea of black magic. They'll talk about Poco. They'll talk about Orbia. They'll talk about voodoo. And that was that was a representation that was given to me by just the Jamaican people. Now, I entered this space, this was a very specific burial situation. So the entire film is from one burial event and ceremony, and it was it was the entire day, but it was in 2 different locations in Jamaica, and it was for a person that was a member of one of the local churches in the area that I grew up, and he was a close family member because he lived on the same like block or street as I when I was growing up. So my entrance into that was through this like there was this like natural connection. My mother had the relationship, and I entered that space. But in terms of just in terms of like what happened when I went in, it was more about capturing. It was more about capturing what was, and not casting any of these like preconceived notions of what this religion or these religious practices look like. So growing up, I used to hear the singing and the stomping, and it was very infectious. And it was one of those things where people would say, "Oh yeah, they're reviving the dead. They're sacrificing chickens," like the crazy things that people would say. But for me, it was when I walked in, the first thing I was told was, I was stopped at the door and was like, "You have a camera. What are you going to say about us?" And I think that was the main thing. So like the film itself was supposed to be this simple observation of the practice and the movement and the music. And then thinking about how there's this like link across the ocean to African religions, and that wasn't things that were being said in my communities. It was more about all the things that they could be doing that were seen to fall into the characterization of Black magic. And I don't. What was the second part of the question? I'm not sure if that answered the first part for me.
No, that's fine. That's what I was just talking about. I know that it has that this particular revivalist movement has a very long tradition in Jamaica on the island, and I know its relationship to voodoo and obeah and these other religious practices.
And I mean, I guess to add to that part was, looking into the history. I can't tell you that I'm an expert on it because I don't want to speak for members of the church. But one of the things that I found that was interesting was that like any other reason why creolization exists is like there was this need to develop this comfort within like a structure that was being forced on you. So like if Catholicism was the religion at the time, and Christianity, and then to keep your African practices, that's kind of like how it emerged. And when I think about this idea of the revival, I think about the idea that in some way to me in Jamaica, it represents like this reviving of our history or our lineage and our connection back to Africa more than anything else. So that's kind of like what I got out of that ceremony, and I took away from like making the film. And yeah, so I mean, they didn't tell me specifically what what the actual like if they would actually cop to these like misrepresentations. But that's kind of
Okay, thank you. I'd like to now open this forum to our guests and participants and audience. And you can post your questions and to any of the panelists, and let's get this thing going in a different direction. So anybody out there wants to ask a question to any of the panelists with regard to the work? Whilst the audience members are thinking of questions to pose to you, I will just continue the conversation by getting back to Jacob. Could you just talk very briefly about the challenges you had in shooting a documentary in a prison in Zambia? What kind of logistical problems you had in actually making that film?
They were really, really huge. We had to all the time create trust towards and vis-a-vis the inmates, and then we had the system that was really closed initially, and that system is still very closed. There had never been a film crew filming in the prison before. The prison is 100 years old, so to get access into that old, confined, secluded, shut off part of Zambia, and it took a lot of effort. So the film has been underway for many years, more than 8 years, in fact, since we first got the idea that it could be interesting and possible, and we felt there was a chance, at least, to get there because of personal connections. I had lived in Zambia, and I felt it was possible, that there were slowly gaining trust, presenting the vision over and over again. When the prison staff changed, when the administration behind it changed, when the ministry changed, all the time we had to regain the trust. All the time struggling with keeping our cast together. So it took a long time. Eventually, the film is shot over a period of 2-3 months in total, but it took 8 years to prepare the groundwork. It's been extremely complicated.
Okay, good. Any questions or comments from the audience? Okay, there's one here, and it's I guess it's a kind of a question / comment, and any one of you can respond to it. And it is, it says, the person asks, I wonder if hybridity between documentary and narrative or across artistic forms comes more naturally to work that subverts dominant cultures. Sunil, you want to try, take a stab at it?
Yeah, thank you. I'm still thinking about some things that Rox said as well, and really appreciated all the conversation that was going on. And I think about hybridity and obviously in relationship to creolite. And I think it's an interesting question, which I guess to maybe rephrase it is, my question is, what is the dominant culture, right? And that has to be named, and we have to understand what dominant culture is, and how other cultures become absorbed by that dominant culture. I think one thing I like to think about is the question of whiteness and what whiteness is, and how whiteness absorbs things that are non-white and into itself, sort of how capitalism also absorbs non-capitalist tendencies within its reach. So I wonder what that kind of question is. Oh, it looks like also Eric added another question. Says, I'm wondering if Sunil, Rox, or folks from Cavallo see their efforts as part of a cinematic reclamation of historical practices in opposition to colonial narratives. So that's an interesting interesting point as well. So I think that the question of if it comes naturally is kind of it's tough to question, because I think that the idea of resistance, there has to be a desire there to want to resist in the first place. So I definitely can't answer if it's natural or not, but for me, that is what I want to do. I want to resist. I want to resist quote unquote dominant narratives, but also to resist in other ways things that have been given as de facto, which of course they're not. We have agency, we have the ability to change the world. So how does a moving image practice go about that other than just raising awareness? What are the liberatory or emancipatory potentials of the moving image that go beyond shedding light on a situation? So these are questions that I ask. I'm very curious to hear what Rox has to say as well.
I would agree with you. I think that's what I'm doing too as well. Is like, I think through all my work, it's about this idea of like resisting the dominant narrative, resisting. And I think, Sonal, you may have mentioned this earlier when you were talking. I think it was you were talking about the archive, and thinking about, you know, what exactly does that mean, right? Because even in my practice is like thinking about, even when I think about patient voodoo, right? And that was something that I was I kind of went on a journey to understand a little bit more when I was working on this project, because trying to see the parallels of how, you know, just your own people start to think about themselves. So I think resisting and observing and then putting it out there, and also to, you know, finding a way to make it engaging. And it is definitely about, for me, to, you know, to I guess rewrite in some way the colonial narrative, because it has been the dominant narrative for sure. So I definitely agree, and I think for all of us, we do it in different ways. For me personally, it's not to add the bells and whistles to it, but it's for it to be as plain and simple as possible to just push it there, push it out. So.
Okay, great. I would also like to pose that question to our Brazilian friends on this question of resisting dominant cinematic representations or narratives. But also, there's also another question somebody posted, which is, why did you choose to name the film The Horse or Cavallo? I mean, what is its significance in relation to the film, to the work?
Então, ele está perguntando, primeiro responde a primeira pergunta que eu escrevi, aí depois vocês falam o porquê do nome cavalo.
Good afternoon, hi, my name is Alexandra. Uma resposta vale para as duas perguntas. Cavallo é um filme que fala desses corpos ancestrais em diáspora. Então, sim, a nossa ideia com o projeto é de um futurismo afro-indígena, onde o corpo, a dramaturgia, a estética afro-brasileira chega ao mundo, não só a partir dos dramas, mas também das conquistas e da potência criativa desses corpos.
E o nome cavalo?
O nome cavalo é para as culturas de matrizes afro, tanto Umbanda quanto Candomblé, é esse corpo que se dispõe a esse estado de transição entre o mundo do meio e o mundo de baixo, que é onde nós vivemos. Então, o cavalo é a representação simbólica de África em diáspora, que somos todos nós afro-indígenas, hoje não mais em África, mas no Brasil.
Caramba, será que eu consigo traduzir tudo que falou tão bem? So, first, he's saying, yes, their film is supposed to be a questioning of colonialism, and yes, they are trying to do a kind of Afrofuturism and to talk about the creative potential of Black bodies with that. And the name cavallo, the horse, is supposed to represent in Candomblé, the Brazilian, Afro-Brazilian religion, a body in transition, like representing this divide between the middle and the world of the middle and the world of below. That's the world that we are living in, the world of below. And the cavallo, the horse, should be should symbolize this transition between those two words.
Mm-hmm.
And it's supposed to represent Africa also.
Okay, could you speak to the very last dance performance in the water space and in relation to that idea?
Ele está pedindo para vocês falarem da última performance que aparece no filme e com relação a essa ideia de transição e do cavalo, tá?
Não, é a transição no sentido do cavalo. Você fala da mediunidade, acho que fica melhor falar do processo.
Ele tá falando lá daquela última performance na água do filme, sabe? Dentro da água, ele queria que vocês falassem sobre ela.
Explica o processo, João.
Então, foi o meu processo no filme ele foi um processo de estímulo, né, do encontro aí com esse orixá, que é o Oxum. E a partir disso montou-se, pensou-se naquele cenário, e a partir de arquétipos que eu ia estudando e conhecendo esse orixá, é que eu fui buscando, eu não diria que a minha performance é uma representação, mas é um modo de ressignificar essa dança desse orixá, né? Como é que o meu corpo vai estar nesse encontro com a minha ancestralidade.
Então, she's talking about her process of developing this performance, and she talked about this stimulus of this encounter with Oshun, the Orisha Oshun, and she talked how her performance is a resignification of the ritual, the Candomblé ritual of Oshun, and also that the film was taught through this process of her discovering that she's a daughter of Oshun.
É uma coisa para ressaltar nessa última performance da Joelma, que foi um plano só, filmado, não teve um ensaio prévio, foi uma tomada só, sem corte. Então ela fez aquilo ali, foi o que ficou, filmado como um documentário.
So he's saying that there was no rehearsal for this last performance. It was a single shot, and it was no repetition. So, yeah, it's really performance.
Okay. There was a question about the archive and its significance here. Well, actually, was more of a comment about the archive. It says, love the idea of making the archive known, a way of making its history and politics visible. Is that your interpretation of the use of that in your work, Sunil?
Yeah, absolutely, Devin. Definitely, really kind of hit the nail on the head. There's definitely a way of making visible the invisible, I think. Yeah, actually, I want to hear from other people as well. I feel like I've talked already a lot, but I'll defer my time to everyone else. But thank you, Devin, for your comment.
Okay. Yeah, we're a bit tight on time, so we do not have a lot of time left. And Jacob, is there anything else you'd like to say about your work?
Well, I thought I had also relating to your work, Sunil, is how you interact with your subjects in the film or with your cast, how you are involved very much. So the whole reflexivity, this about you're being there, and where does the view come from? Where's the from where do we see this film? I like that a lot, and I think in our film I think one experiment we really tried to use the color grading. And you have this prison that is 100 years old, and there's so much going on. There's 1,200 inmates. They cannot lay down and sleep. They sit body against body. The food is not sufficient, and there's so much going on. So what story do you want to tell there? So what we did, I think, with the color grading is we kind of put this pink light on the institution, so you can really see there's this pink light, and it's a metaphor, of course, for the story that we wanted to tell, which because there's the challenge of making this relatable to the viewer. How do you tell a story here that is relatable and you can connect with us as a viewer, so that the story becomes meaningful and the film becomes meaningful because it now can move something and do something with the audience? So we basically chose to tell a story about love, which is of course the most universal and relatable thing we have. So with the color grading, we did like a double take, I believe. We really took ownership of the story and shaped it. We turned it in the direction of a love story, and really painted the place pink or red. Pink because it was this soft love that the inmate felt for his child that was the center of the story. So, but this made it also universal. So we shaped it, and in this way we made it possible to connect with it at the same time. So that was how we tried to put ourselves into the story.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up because we do not have any time left. But I'd like to thank our panelists, Sunil, Rox, our friends in Brazil, Rafael Barbosa, Werner Salles, I think it's Jao, and I'm not quite sure the other person's name, but all of you from Brazil. Alex Morelli, thank you so much. Jacob, thank you so much. And I would also like to thank Renata for doing such a great job in translating from Portuguese into English. Made it so much easier for all of us. Again, I'd like to thank the organizers of this festival for putting this together, and I wish everyone well. Stay safe, wear your masks like our friends in Brazil are doing right now. And hopefully we meet in person one day and not via a platform like this one. So thank you so much.
Obrigado. Thank you, obrigado.
Thank you, thank you.
Obrigado.
Okay, take care, everybody. Bye.